They sent me to fix a hum. That was the official work order. A vibration in the lower spine of the palace, somewhere behind the ninth resonance plate, that the Queen's drones could not isolate and her artisans could not silence. I read the order 3 times on the lift down, because in 3 standard years inside the hive court of Visith Coral, I had learned that the Kathera never described a problem the way the problem actually was. A hum meant a cracked harmonic anchor. A flicker meant a structural fault. A bad smell meant somebody was already dead behind the wall, and nobody wanted to say so out loud. My name is Marin Cade. I was a human contractor on a Peace Clause work permit, 3rd class, with a wrench in my belt and a soft cloth folded inside my coat for cleaning lenses I would never own. I was 34 years old. The war had ended when I was 31, and the armistice had cost humanity 2 colonies, a moon, and the right to call ourselves a sovereign species in the inner ring. We had bought the silence in return for engineers. The Kathera hated engineering the way a swimmer hates drowning, and they needed us in their walls. The lift opened onto the inner court at the wrong floor. I noticed it the second the doors hissed. The light was wrong. It was a paler gold, a deeper hush, and the air carried that resinous incense the high castes burned in the chamber strings off the throne. I should have keyed the panel and gone back up. Instead, I stepped out because the hum was right there, vibrating up through my boots, and an engineer follows the fault the way a hound follows a scent. The corridor was empty. 12 meters down, a tall arched doorway stood half open, and from inside came the sound of a small mechanical thing that was failing in a very specific and very fixable way. I knew that sound the way you know your mother's cough through a closed door. I went toward it without thinking. She was sitting on the floor. She was sitting on the floor of her own private sanctum, the queen of the Kathera and the matriarch of 7 moons, in a pale undershell with her plates folded close, and in her lap was a music spindle that I recognized from the human markets on Tessin Prime. A cheap one. A child's toy almost. It was clicking and skipping and producing a tinny squeal that any human kid in the outer settlements could have fixed with a paperclip. I stopped breathing. I knew exactly how dead I was. She raised her head. Her eyes were the color of wet bronze, and there were 4 of them, and they were all on me. "You are not Vethri," she said. Her standard was textbook. She had learned it from someone careful. "No, ma'am." "You are a human." "Yes, ma'am." "How did you arrive at this floor?" It was not a question. It was a recitation of facts she was making sure of, the way you check a wound before you decide how scared to be. I said, "Lift error. I think the resonance from the floor below pulled the index. I'll go back up." She looked down at the spindle in her lap. She turned it over once. Then she said, without lifting her head, "Can you make it stop doing that?" I did not move. "It is not an order," she said. "It is a request." "Yes, ma'am," I said. "I can make it stop doing that." I crossed the chamber on legs that did not feel like mine. I knelt 3 meters from her because 3 meters was the courtesy distance for a human laborer in the presence of a brood matriarch, and I held out my hand for the spindle. She passed it across the air without rising. Her claw brushed my palm. I had been told my whole life that Kathera skin was cold. It was not. It was warm and very dry, like a stone left out in afternoon sun. I worked on the spindle on my knees for 9 minutes. The fault was a hair of carbon on the inner contact, exactly as I had thought. I scraped it off with the edge of my fingernail because I did not want to take a tool out of my belt in front of her. I closed the casing. I tested the spool. The little device began to play a song I did not know, slow and 3-noted, the kind of thing somebody sings to a child they are afraid of losing. I held it out to her on my open palm. She did not take it. She listened. Her plates loosened a fraction along her shoulders, the way a person sighs when they have been holding their breath for a long time without realizing. When the song ended, she said, "Thank you." I had been on the planet for 3 years. No Kathera had ever said that to me, in any language for any reason. "Ma'am," I said, "I'm going to leave now." "Yes," she said, "you should. Take the eastern stair. The drones do not pattern it until the third watch." I was at the threshold when she spoke again. "Engineer." "Ma'am." "What is your name?" "Marin Cade, ma'am." "Marin," she said. She said it the way you test the weight of a stone before you decide whether to keep it in your pocket. Then she lifted the spindle and started the song again, and I went out and up the eastern stair and back to the bunkroom in the laborer's wing, and lay on my cot with my hands shaking for about an hour. I told nobody. There was nobody to tell. The other humans in the bunkroom would not have understood. They were good people, mostly engineers, riggers, sub-grade artisans, the kind of population the Cathara had absorbed off the surrendered colonies and never quite known what to do with. They survived by not looking up. The first rule of the laborer's wing was that you did not draw attention from the upper floors, because attention from the upper floors was almost never the good kind. The second rule was that you did not tell stories about the upper floors even when you came home from one, because the telling was itself a kind of looking up, and somebody was always listening. I lay on my cot that night and stared at the metal ribbing of the ceiling. The bunkroom held 40 cots in 2 rows. The lights had been dimmed to the amber rest setting an hour ago. A man 2 cots down was snoring with a soft whistle in his nose. Somebody at the far end was crying quietly, the way people cry in barracks, with a forearm thrown over the face and the shoulders making no sound. I listened to all of it and thought about a queen sitting, cross-legged on the floor of her own sanctum with a broken toy in her lap, and I thought, that woman is lonely. That woman is lonely in a way I am not supposed to know about. It is a dangerous thing to know that about a queen. I got up before the third watch and washed my face in the trough at the end of the bunkroom and went to my shift. I cleaned drone manifolds. I patched cooling spines. I ate the gray protein loaf and listened to the cleaner from the broadcast crew complain about his back. I did not let myself think about her during the day. I did not entirely succeed at not letting myself think about her at night. I told myself, it was the kind of thing that happens to a man who has been alone for a long time and gets surprised by a small kindness, and that it would pass. It did not pass, but I got better at not noticing whether it had passed or not. The hum in the 9th resonance plate turned out to be a cracked harmonic anchor, exactly as I had guessed, and I fixed it in a day and a half. My foreman, a stooped Cathara named Othek who hated humans on principle but hated incompetence more, signed off on the work order with a flick that meant satisfactory and dismissed. I went back to the rotation. I cleaned drone manifolds. I patched the cooling spines on the south wall. I ate the gray protein loaf in the laborer's refectory and listened to the other humans complain about their feet and their families and the smell. 2 weeks later, a runner came down the laborer's corridor and stopped in front of my cot. "Cade," the runner said, "spindle work, inner court." The other humans went very quiet. I followed the runner up. He did not take me to the same floor. He took me higher, to a workroom off the Queen's personal artisan suite, and inside the workroom were 47 broken music spindles laid out in rows on a long pale table. Some of them were toys. Some of them were ceremonial. One of them was so old its casing had gone the soft gray of riverstone. "Her effulgence wishes them repaired," the runner said, "in sequence of her preference. The order is marked on the table beneath each device. All of them. In sequence of her preference." He left. I worked for 19 days. I slept in the workroom on a folded blanket because nobody told me not to. Food came on a tray twice a day, better food than the refectory served, and I did not ask where it came from. On the 7th day she came in. She did not announce herself. She walked in through a side door I had not noticed, in the same pale undershell, and she sat on a low bench by the wall and watched me work. She did not speak for an hour. I did not speak either. I had 3 spindles open on the bench and I was matching contact filaments under a glass. After the hour, she said, "You hum while you work." I had not realized. "Sorry, ma'am." "Do not apologize." "What is the song?" "It's just," I had to think. "It's a thing my mother used to sing when I was small. When the wind came down off the plateau and the windows rattled, she'd sing it to keep us from being afraid." "Sing it." "Ma'am." "Sing it the whole way through." I sang it. I have a bad voice and I knew it, and the song was in a dialect of human standard she would not understand, but I sang it because she had asked, and because there was nowhere in that chamber to hide. It is a 4-verse song about a woman who walks down to the sea every evening to wait for a boat that is not coming back, and on the 4th verse she stops waiting and goes home and sets the table for the people who are still alive. My mother sang it for the wrong reasons. I sang it for no reason I could name. When I was done, the Queen sat very still for a long time. Then she said, "Your mother is dead." "Yes, ma'am." "In the war?" "Yes, ma'am." "At HFY?" "Yes, ma'am." The Kathara had glassed HFY in the 3rd year. 4 million human dead. The Queen had ordered the strike. I knew that. She knew that I knew that. We sat in the workroom with that fact between us like a piece of furniture neither of us could move. She said, "I will not apologize to you. It would be obscene." "Yes, ma'am." "But I will tell you that I did not sleep for 40 days after that order, and I will tell you that I have not slept properly since." I did not say anything. She rose from the bench. She crossed to the table and looked at the spindle I had open under the glass, and her 4 eyes tracked the small, bright movement of the contact I was setting. "Your hands," she said. "Ma'am." "They do not shake when you work." "No, ma'am." "They shook the first time, in my sanctum." "Yes, ma'am." "Why do they not shake now?" I looked at my own hands. I had not noticed. "Because you asked me to fix the song," I said, "and I am fixing the song, that's all I'm doing." She left through the side door without another word. The first speaker of the old guard was a Kathara named Thrax Vohal. He was 900 years old, twice the Queen's age, and his plates had gone the color of riverbed slate. He had been a war minister under 3 previous matriarchs. He had voted against the armistice with humanity in every chamber where his vote was counted. He believed, with the absolute clarity of an old man who has outlived every argument against him, that the swarm should have finished us when we were down. He was, in the way of certain old men, not entirely wrong about what he believed and entirely wrong about what to do with it. I did not know any of this on the day he walked into the workroom. I was on day 14 of the spindles. The Queen had not come back since the song. I had 31 devices left to repair, and I was working on a piece of ceremonial brood music that had been damaged in what looked like a fall, and I did not look up when the side door opened because by then I had gotten used to drones drifting in and out. A claw sat down on the table beside my hand. It was the color of slate, and it was very large, and it was not a drone's. "Engineer," the voice said. I went still. "Look at me, human." I looked up. He filled the doorway. He was bigger than her. The Queen was tall, but Thrax Vohal was vast in the way old Kathara get when they have spent centuries letting their plates grow into their station. He carried no weapon. He did not need one. "You have been in this chamber for 14 days, he said. "Yes, sir." "You have been alone with the matriarch on at least one occasion." "She watched me work, sir, for approximately 1 hour, on day 7. "You sang to her." I did not answer. He had not made it a question. He picked up one of the spindles from the table, the cheap one. The first one, the one she had been holding in her lap when I walked into her sanctum. He turned it over in his claw. He set it down again with a precision that was worse than dropping it. "There is an arrangement among the great houses," he said. When a matriarch becomes unwell, when her judgment is compromised, when the swarm's continuity is threatened by her affections, the great houses do not depose her. We are not barbarians. We make her well again, by removing the source of the unwellness. He was looking at me the way a man looks at a piece of machinery. He is deciding whether to keep or to scrap. Do you understand me, engineer? Yes, sir. You will finish your work order. You will return to the laborer's wing. You will not enter this chamber again. You will not be summoned. If you are summoned, you will not come. If you cannot avoid coming, you will be deaf and stupid and unable to repair so much as a hinge. Do you understand me? Yes, sir. Say it. I understand, sir. He left. I sat at the table for a long time with my hands flat on the wood. Then I picked up the next spindle and got back to work, because I was an engineer and I had been given a work order, and an engineer follows the fault. She came back on day 17. She came in through the side door and she stopped halfway across the floor because she could see it in my face before I said anything. She had not lived 900 years for nothing. She had lived 400, which was enough. Thrax Vohal, she said. Yes, ma'am. Went. 3 days ago. She closed her eyes. All 4 of them. It was an expression I had never seen on a K-Thara and would not see again for a long time. What did he tell you? That I should finish the work order and not come back. That if I am summoned, I should not come. That if I cannot avoid coming, I should be useless. And will you be? I am finishing the work order, ma'am. That is not what I asked. I looked at her. I had been told my whole life by my mother and my foreman and my colony marshal, and every authority figure I had ever known, that the correct answer in a situation like this was the safe answer, and that the safe answer was the one that kept the speaker alive long enough to give a different answer later. I had given safe answers my whole life. I had given a safe answer to Thrax Vohal 3 days ago, and I had been giving them in my head ever since, drafting them, polishing them, lining them up like spindles on a table. I said, if you ask me to come, ma'am, I will come. That is foolish. Yes, ma'am. Why? Because you asked me to fix the song. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she sat down on the low bench by the wall, the same bench in the same pale undershell, and she said, Tell me about HFY. Ma'am. Tell me about your mother. I told her. I had not told anyone in years. I told her about the plateau and the wind and the way the windows had rattled in the kitchen, and about my mother's hands, which were large and rough and had been a teacher's hands before they were a refugee's hands, and about the song, and about the boat that did not come back. I told her my mother had not died in the strike itself, but in the relocation camp afterward, of a respiratory infection that would have been a 3-day inconvenience in any functioning hospital, and that the camp had not had a functioning hospital because the K-Thara blockade had not permitted one. I told her this without raising my voice. I had been over it many times in my head, and I had used up most of the heat of it years ago. When I was done, she said, I am going to tell you something I have not told anyone, not my brood sister, not my first speaker, not the chamber. Do you understand the weight of what I am about to give you? Yes, ma'am. My matriarch mother died at HFY also. She was on the lead cruiser. There was a human pilot who flew his fuel ship into the bridge of her vessel. She did not survive. I had not known that. So you understand, she said, that when I ordered the glassing, I was not ordering it as a matriarch. I was ordering it as a daughter, and that I have known, for 19 years, that I murdered 4 million people because I was hurting, and I was 28 years old, and I did not yet know how to hurt without making other people hurt with me. She was not crying. K-Thara cannot cry, but her plates had gone the color her undershell was, the color of the inside of a thing that has been opened up. I do not tell you this to be forgiven, she said. I tell you this because you sang me your mother's song and I owe you a true thing in return. The exchange is unequal. I am aware of that. I sat at the table with 31 spindles I had not yet repaired, and I could not think of a single thing to say. She rose. She crossed to the table. She put one warm, dry claw very lightly on the back of my hand, and she said, "Finish the work order, Marin Cade. Then go back to your bunk room and wait. I am going to think for a while about what to do." She left. What she did was this. She summoned the great houses to formal chamber, and in front of all of them she announced a program of human Cathara technical exchange, with a class of human engineers granted second-tier residency on Viseth Coral and full guild protection under matriarchal seal. She announced reparations to the surviving HFY families, paid out of the matriarch's personal estate, an amount that I later learned was 3/4 of what she personally owned. She announced a public statement of grief, in her own voice, in the open broadcast, in standard so that human listeners could understand her without translation. The old guard understood what she was doing. She was not just making peace. She was making peace impossible to undo. She was salting the soil so that no successor could replant the war. Thraxvohol rose in chamber and called it the act of an unwell mind. The vote to formally censure her failed by 3 plates. I did not know any of this in real time. I learned it in the laborer's refectory from a human cleaner who had a cousin in the broadcast crew. By then I had been back in the bunk room for 9 days, and I had not been summoned, and I had been telling myself in increasingly elaborate ways that this was a good thing. On the 10th day, the runner came again. Cade Inner Court. The other humans went very quiet again. They were getting used to it. I was not. She received me in the small audience chamber, not the sanctum. It was a more public room, with 2 attendants by the door and a recording lens active in the corner. She was in formal plate, the deep red ceremonial layering, with her crown of resonant filament wound around her brow. She looked like the queen. "Engineer Cade," she said. "Ma'am, you will be appointed to the second-tier residency program as its first member. You will serve as the technical liaison between the matriarchal artisans and the incoming human engineering cohort. You will reside in the artisan wing. You will report directly to me, in this room, on the 8th of every monad. Do you have any objections?" "No, ma'am." "Are you certain?" "Yes, ma'am." "Engineer Cade, I am going to ask you to listen carefully to what I am about to say next, because I am going to say it only once and the lens is recording. This appointment is a public act. It is not a private one. It cannot be a private one. Do you understand the distinction I am making?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then we understand each other." "Yes, ma'am." She dismissed me. I went out, and the attendants closed the door, and I stood in the corridor for a moment with my hand braced against the wall. It is one thing to fix a music spindle on your knees in a sanctum. It is another to be the public face of a piece. I learned the rhythm of the artisan wing. I learned the names of the Cathara masters who did not hate me and the ones who did, and I learned to tell the difference by the angle of their plates when I entered a room. I learned the politics of guild seal placement and the 7 kinds of solder a brood court would accept on resonance work. The human engineering cohort arrived in tranches of 12. I met them at the lift. I was 26 the first time someone called me sir. The cohort was strange. They were drawn from the surrendered colonies, mostly the way I had been, but they were younger than me and they had grown up in the post-war settlements, and they did not carry the war in their bodies the way the older laborers did. They had been taught standard Cathara in school. They had read briefing manuals on plate language and resonant courtesy. They arrived expecting to be hated, and were instead introduced to the matriarchal artisans by a human in a clean coat with a guild badge on his collar, and they did not know what to do with that. I trained them in the workshop on the 2nd floor of the artisan wing. I taught them the angle of approach to a brood master, which is a quarter turn off the center line so that the master can see your hands without feeling watched. I taught them which kinds of solder smelled like grief to a Kathara nose and were therefore inappropriate for ceremonial work. I taught them not to hum while a high caste was in the room, because humming was a private thing in Kathara culture, and to do it in front of a stranger was the equivalent of undressing in front of one. They wrote it all down. They were very serious. I had not been that serious at their age, and the memory of my own lack of seriousness made me kinder to them than I might otherwise have been. The first time the Queen visited the workshop, 3 months into the cohort's residency, every single one of them froze where they stood. There were 9 of them in the room, 9 humans with 9 wrenches in 9 hands, motionless at their benches, while the matriarch of 7 moons walked between the rows and asked careful technical questions about harmonic anchoring. She had read up. She had read up because she did not want to embarrass them, and the humans understood this without being told, and after she left one of them, a young woman named Sira Vone from the relocation settlements on Tessin sat down on the floor with her back against the leg of her workbench and cried for about 10 minutes. I sat down next to her and did not say anything. After a while she said, she knew my supervisor's name. From the report I sent up last monad. She remembered it. I said, yes, she does that. Sira Vone looked at me sideways and said, how do you stand it? I said, I don't really. You learn to stand next to it, it's not the same thing. I saw her on the 8th of every monad. The meetings were public. They were also, by long habit, scheduled to run 20 minutes and almost always ran 90. We would begin with the technical liaison report. We would move into broader policy. Then somehow, we would be talking about my mother or her brood sister or the way the wind came down off the plateau in the colony I had not seen in 12 years, or the song her own mother had sung to her when she was small, which she sang for me once, very quietly, and which had 4 notes in it and no words. I did not touch her, she did not touch me. We were not fools. The lens was always on. But there are kinds of intimacy that do not require touching, and the chamber knew it. Thrax Vohul knew it. The old guard knew it. The whole hive knew it, and the broadcast columnists made it into a thing that the small spindle vendors on the lower terraces gossiped about while they sold their wares. There is an old line, I learned later, that the human columnists picked up and translated and ran in their own outlets. A Kathara commentator said it on a panel. They hate a matriarch who is content. It came out in Standard as asterisk they hate a happy queen. It went around. It went around the hive and it went around the inner ring, and it came back to the artisan wing on a printed feed somebody had clipped and pinned to the bulletin board outside the refectory. I saw it on a Wednesday. I stood in front of it for a long time. Then I went back to my workbench and I did not say anything to anyone. The warnings came in 3 waves over the next 2 monads. The first was a piece of folded paper under the door of my quarters. The paper was Kathara resin pulp, the kind used in the inner administrative wings, not the cheaper stock the laborers used. The writing on it was in human standard, printed by a machine that had been deliberately set to make it look hand-drawn. It said, "Go home, engineer. Take the next transport off-world. We will arrange the passage. We will arrange the work. No one needs to know why you left." It was not signed. It did not need to be. I read it twice, and then I burned it in the small refractory burner in my workshop, because the artisan wing had a refractory burner for slag and I had a use for it. I did not show it to anyone. I did not tell her. I told myself I did not tell her because the recording lens in the audience chamber would have captured it, and the chamber knew enough about us already. But the truth was that I did not tell her because I knew exactly what she would do, and what she would do would make everything worse. The second came 2 weeks later. I was working on a scaffold in the upper resonance gallery, 60 meters off the floor, replacing a cracked harmonic anchor on the south face of the chamber. The scaffold was Kathara make, which meant it was rated for Kathara mass, which is approximately 3 times human mass. The safety lines were rated for Kathara weight. The hooks were rated for Kathara grip. I had been on the scaffold for an hour and a half when a cable parted 10 meters above me, and the whole platform on the right-hand side dropped about 1.5 meters before the secondary lines caught it. I held on. I had been holding the rail with my good hand because I was using the bad one to brace the anchor, and the good hand held me. I hung there for about 6 seconds before the secondary safety system kicked in and stabilized the platform. I did not fall. I would have fallen if I had been holding the rail with my bad hand. The 2 slow fingers would not have closed in time. I climbed down. I went to the scaffold quartermaster and I requested the parted cable. He gave it to me without question. I took it back to my workshop, and I put it under the magnifier, and I looked at the failure point for about 20 minutes. The failure was a clean cut. I went to see her that night off the schedule off the 8th. I went up the eastern stair because the drone still did not pattern it until the 3rd watch, and I knocked on the side door of her sanctum the way I had not done in 3 years. She opened it herself. She was in the pale undershell. She looked at my face and she said, "Come in." I told her about the cable. I showed her the piece of it. I did not tell her about the note. She listened. When I was finished, she said, "Marin, you have to go." "Ma'am." "You have to leave Visith Coral. I will arrange the transport. I will arrange the work. There is a position in the Human Technical Consulate on Tessin Prime that I have been holding for you. It is yours. It has been yours since before the corridor. I have been waiting for you to need it." "Ma'am." "Do not ma'am asterisk me, Marin. Do not stand in my sanctum and ma'am me. I am asking you, as your friend, to go. They will kill you. They will kill you in a way I cannot prevent because I cannot watch every cable and every doorway and every cup of tea in this palace. And the moment they kill you, the peace will hold, but you will be dead. And I will have failed at the one private thing I have ever asked of myself." I sat down on the bench by the wall. I had never sat on that bench before. It was her bench. I said, "If I go, what happens to the cohort?" "They will be reassigned to a senior K-Thara liaison. They will be fine." "They will not be fine. They will be polite and they will work next to people who think their mothers should have died at HFY, and they will not have anybody in the room who knows how to translate a playtangle for them. Sierra Vone will be fine for about 3 weeks and then she will quit. The cohort will fall apart inside a year." "The cohort is not your responsibility." "It is exactly my responsibility. You gave it to me." She closed her eyes, all 4 of them. I said, "Ma'am, the note came first, 2 weeks ago, under my door." She opened her eyes again. "You did not tell me." "No, ma'am." "Why?" "Because I knew what you would do." "And what would I do?" "You would purge the wing. You would set the drones on every K-Thara in the artisan corridor, and you would make me responsible for whatever happened next. And I am not going to be responsible for that. I am here to fix things. I am not here to break them." She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, the quietest I had ever heard her, "You stubborn, stubborn man." "Yes, ma'am." "You will not go." "No, ma'am." "You understand that if they succeed, I will not forgive them, and I will not forgive myself." "Yes, ma'am, but that is not a reason for me to go. That is a reason for me to be careful." She made a sound I had not heard a K-Thara make before. It was not laughter. It was the noise that comes out of a person who has run out of arguments and is not yet ready to admit it. I left by the eastern stair. The drones did not pattern it until the 3rd watch. The 3rd warning came 2 days after that. It was not a note and it was not a cable. It was a thing I found waiting on my workbench when I came in for first shift. A single ceremonial filament blade, the kind a brood sister carries at her hip and is not supposed to draw, laid across the wood with the edge facing me. There was no message attached. There did not need to be. I picked the blade up. I felt the weight of it. I carried it down to the refectory, and I gave it to the foreman of the day watch, a K-Thara named Othikvel, who was a distant cousin of my old foreman and had been quietly sympathetic to the cohort since their arrival. I said, "This was on my bench when I came in. I do not know who left it. I am giving it to you because I am required to report ceremonial weapons in the artisan wing, and I am required to surrender any I find. I am following protocol. I have no other comment about it." Othakvel took the blade. He looked at me for a long moment with all four of his eyes, and then he said, very quietly, in the trade dialect that most upper-caste Kathara do not speak, "Engineer. You walk carefully now." I said, "Yes, master." "Carefully." "Yes, master." I went back to my workbench and I picked up the spindle I had been repairing and I got back to work. I did not tell her about the blade. There was no point. She knew the shape of what was coming. We both did. The first attempt was a knife. It happened in the corridor outside the audience chamber, on the 8th of the 7th monad, 14 months into my appointment. It was not a knife exactly. It was a Kathara ceremonial filament blade, the kind a brood sister carries at her hip and is not supposed to draw. The attendant who drew it was a young Kathara named Vekamor, whose father had died at the Second Battle of Antares. She came at the queen from the left side, and she came fast, and she had been planning it for some time because she had timed it for the half-second between the queen passing the recording lens and the attendant on the right turning her head. I was 3 steps behind the queen. I am not a soldier. I have never been a soldier. I was trained to fix harmonic anchors, and I was carrying nothing in my hands but a clipboard and a stylus. But I had been 3 years in that palace, and I had learned to watch for the angle of plates, and I saw Vekamor's plates go wrong about 2 seconds before her hand did. I did the only thing I knew how to do. I stepped in front of the queen and I caught the blade. I did not catch it well. I caught it with my left forearm, which is to say the blade went into my forearm, all the way through to the other side. It was a filament blade and it was thin and it was sharp, and the bone in my forearm parted around it the way a piece of soft wood parts around a wire. I felt nothing for about a second. Then I felt everything. I am told that I shouted something. I do not remember shouting anything. I remember falling to one knee because the arm would not hold me up, and I remember Vekamor pulling the blade back to strike again, and I remember the queen. The queen moved. I had never seen her move at speed before. She was not a warrior matriarch. She was a thinker, a chamber-sitter, a signer of treaties. But she was 400 years old and a Kathara, and she had been a young brood soldier once, 400 years ago, and the body remembers what the body remembers. She struck Vekamor across the face with the back of her claw, and Vekamor went into the wall hard enough that I heard the plates crack. The blade clattered. The other attendant was screaming for drones. The recording lens, which was supposed to capture a routine departure, captured all of it. The queen knelt next to me. She put both her claws on my forearm above and below the wound, and she said, "Marin, Marin, look at me. Marin, do not look at the arm, look at me." I looked at her. "You foolish man," she said. Her voice was steady, her plates were not. "You foolish, foolish man." "It's a clean cut," I said. I was an engineer. I assessed damage. "It's a clean cut. The filament's monomolecular. It's sealed as it went. I'm not bleeding out. I'm going to be fine. I'm going to." "Be quiet." "Yes, ma'am." The drones came. The medics came. They took me one way and they took her the other way, and the last thing I saw before the lift doors closed was her standing in the corridor in her formal red, with my blood on her claws, looking at the recording lens as if she was about to put her hand through it. I lost the use of 2 fingers on the left hand. The medics rebuilt the bone with Kathara growth scaffold, which knit a human forearm together in about 9 days, and they grafted the nerve as well as anyone could, but the 2 outer fingers stayed slow. I can still hold a stylus. I can still hold a spindle. I cannot make a fist with that hand. That is an acceptable price. I was in the medical wing for 14 days. She came on the 2nd day. She came alone, without attendants, in a plain travel cloak with the hood up, and she sat by my cot for about an hour without speaking. I was on enough sedative that I did not entirely understand she was there. When I surfaced, she said, "I am sorry, Marin." "Ma'am, Quiet, I am going to say some things and then I am going to go. The things I am going to say are not strategic. They are true. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am." "You should not have done that." "I know. You are not my guard. You are not a soldier. You are an engineer on a work permit. You had no obligation, by any law of your species or mine, to step in front of that blade." "I know. I should have noticed her plates. I have noticed everyone's plates for 400 years. I was looking at you instead of the corridor. That is my failure, not yours." I did not know what to say to that. She said, "I am going to make this public. The attempt, the recording, all of it. I am going to make it impossible for Thrax Vohal to claim that you are an engineer of no consequence. I am going to make him stand in chamber and explain why a human laborer was prepared to die for the matriarch when a Cathara of the broodline was prepared to kill her. I am going to ruin him with you, Marin. I am going to use what you did. Is that acceptable to you?" I thought about it. I thought about it for a long time, which was not very long because I was on a lot of medication, but it was as long a thought as I had ever had in my life. I said, "Use it, ma'am." "You are certain?" I did not step in front of that blade, so it could be a private thing. She put her warm, dry claw very lightly on the back of my good hand. She did not say anything else. She got up and left. The recording went out the next day. On the 6th day of my recovery, she came again. She came in the evening, after the medical staff had completed their rounds, and she came alone with no cloak this time and no attempt at quiet. The whole wing knew she was there. The drones had cleared the corridor in advance, and outside the door of my room 2 attendants stood with their plates set to the courteous watchful angle that meant the matriarch was not to be disturbed, but was also not to be hidden. She had brought a small covered tray. She set it on the side table beside my cot. She lifted the cover. Underneath was a flatbread, a bowl of clear broth, and a small dish of something dark and sweet-smelling that I did not immediately recognize. "It is human food," she said. "From the recipes the cohort uses. I asked Sira Vone for advice. She has been very patient with me." I stared at the tray. "Ma'am," I said, "did you cook this?" "I did not cook it. The kitchen cooked it," I observed. I asked questions. "I have, perhaps, learned more about the structural integrity of a flatbread than I intended to." She paused. "Sira Vone says you grew up eating this. She says it is what you give somebody when they are recovering. She says her grandmother made it for her after the relocation." I could not speak for a moment. The flatbread was not quite right. The edges were too even, and the surface had been pressed flat in a way no grandmother's hand would have pressed it. The broth was a little too clear. The dark sweet thing in the small dish was approximately a date paste, which I had not eaten since I was 9 years old, and which my mother had made from dates that were not really dates, and a sweetener that was mostly chemical, because the colony commissaries on the plateau had not stocked the real thing. I ate it. I ate all of it. She sat on the visitor's bench by the wall and watched me eat, with her plates set to the com-observer angle that any Cathara master uses when watching a student work, and she did not say anything else until I was done. When I was done, she said, "Was it correct?" "It was not correct, ma'am. It was very close. It was not correct." "Tell me where it failed. I will inform the kitchen." "Ma'am, you do not need to inform the kitchen." "I do need to inform the kitchen. If you are going to eat human food in my palace, the kitchen will learn to make it correctly. We have learned to make 17 ceremonial broods of cuisine for visiting delegations from species none of us will ever meet again. The kitchen can learn to make a flatbread that does not insult an engineer from the plateau." I told her where it had failed. She listened. She nodded in the small lateral way Cathara nod, and she filed it away. Then she sat with me for an hour without speaking, while I drifted in and out of the sedative haze, and when I woke fully she was gone and the tray was gone and there was a folded note on the side table in her own hand, in resonant script that I had to ask HFY to translate for me the next morning. It said, "Heal. The kitchen will do better next time." The next time, 6 days later, the flatbread was correct. Thrax did not survive it. He survived politically for another 6 days, and then his own house turned on him, because in the K-Thera system the great houses do not tolerate a first speaker who has been publicly outflanked. They removed him from the chamber. They did not kill him. They sent him to one of the outer moons with a small retinue and an honorific that meant *old man permitted to remain breathing. He died there 4 years later of nothing in particular. He had outlived his time. I learned the shape of his fall in pieces, from the broadcast feeds and from HFY, and from a junior columnist named Brass Ka who started turning up in the artisan refectory at odd hours and asking questions in a way that suggested he already half knew the answers. The old guard had assumed, in the way of old institutions, that the corridor recording would be quietly suppressed for the dignity of the chamber. They had assumed wrong. The Queen had released it on open broadcast the next morning, before any of the great houses could meet to discuss containment, and by the time Thrax's allies woke up to the situation, it was already saturated through every relay in the inner ring. A K-Thera brood soldier had drawn a blade on the matriarch. A human laborer had stepped in front of it. The image was the image. There was no recontextualizing it. There was no spinning it. There was only the recording, repeated in a loop on every public column for 9 days, with the small added detail. And this was the part I think Thrax never recovered from. That the recording included the Queen kneeling next to me on the corridor floor and calling me a foolish, foolish man in a voice that anyone who had ever loved anyone could recognize. The old guard fractured. 2 of its houses pivoted to the reform faction within a monad. 3 more held out for another 2 years and then quietly folded. The peace held. It is still holding as I write this, 11 years on. The reform faction did not get everything it wanted. It never does. There are still K-Thera who walk past the human quarter on the lower terraces and spit, in the dry plate language way that K-Thera spit, which is a small lateral movement of the lower mandible that no human notices unless they have been here long enough to know what they are looking for. There are still columnists who write that the matriarch is sentimental, that her judgment is compromised by her affections, that the reparations to HFY were a moral surrender. There are still pockets of the brood soldier corps that drill in the deep galleries and tell each other stories about how it used to be, in the old days, when the swarm was the swarm and humans were prey. But they drill and they tell their stories and they do not act. They do not act because Vecamore acted, and the chamber saw what happened to Vecamore's house, and the chamber saw what happened to Thrax, and the chamber learned the only lesson the chamber has ever consistently learned in its 9,000-year history, which is that the matriarch has the long view and the chamber should not bet against her on a short one. I do not think the recording of the corridor did all of that. I think the recording was a stone, and the swarm was a long slope of gravel, and the stone was the one that started the slide. Most of the gravel was already loose. Thrax had been holding it in place with the weight of his own plates, and when the recording went out, the gravel went out from under him, and that was that. I am told the human columnists made a great deal of the corridor footage. I am told there were posters. I am told there is a sculpture in one of the colony museums that depicts a human engineer with his arm raised and a queen behind him, and I am told that the engineer in the sculpture is much taller than I am and much braver looking and does not have a slow ring finger and a slow little finger on his left hand. I have not gone to see it. I do not need to. Sierra Vone went to see it. She came back and told me about it over tea in the artisan refectory. She said the sculpture had a small bronze plaque at its base that read, in human standard and K-Thera resonant script, the piece was not signed in chamber. The piece was signed in a corridor. She said she had stood in front of the plaque for a long time and then she had cried because she had been there during the cable incident and during the blade on the bench, and she had not known about either of them until the columnist Braska wrote the long retrospective piece 6 years later. She said, "You never told us." I said, "There was nothing for you to do about it. Telling you would only have made you afraid." She said, "We were afraid anyway." I said, "Then telling you would have made you more afraid and you were already working at your limit. I made the call. I would make it again." She did not argue with me. She is a senior liaison now with her own cohort of 14. She makes harder calls than that one every monad. She understands. We are not lovers. I want to put that down clearly because the columnists eventually went there too, and they were wrong. The Cathara and humans cannot, in any meaningful biological sense, be lovers. The chemistries do not match. The physical proportions do not match. The reproductive customs do not match in any way that would make sense to either species. The columnists who wrote that we were carrying on a forbidden affair were writing the story they wanted to read, not the story we were living. What we were and what we are is something the columnists do not have a clean word for, and neither do I. There is a Cathara word, ****, which translates poorly into standard. The closest human equivalent is ****one who has heard the song of my mother ****. It is used between brood siblings who have lived through the same childhood. It is used between soldiers who have stood in the same line. It is not, traditionally, used between species. It is not, traditionally, used between a matriarch and a laborer. She used it to me once in the audience chamber on the 8th of a monad about 2 years after the corridor. She used it casually, as if it were a small word. It is not a small word. I have used it back to her in private exactly 1 time. That is the shape of the thing. I am not going to make it smaller by trying to say it more clearly. I am writing this from the artisan wing. It is late in the 3rd watch. The lights are dim to their amber rest setting, and outside my window the lower terraces of the hive court are full of small steady lights, vendors and pilgrims and brood children with their tutors moving through the cool half-dark. The hive does not really sleep. It dims. The queen is 1 floor up. She is doing whatever it is she does at this hour, which I think is mostly reading reports she should have read during the day. She works too hard. I have told her this. She has not stopped. Tomorrow is the 8th of the monad. I will go up to the audience chamber at the appointed time, and we will begin with the technical liaison report, and we will move into broader policy, and then, somehow, we will be talking about my mother, or her brood sister, or the song with 4 notes and no words. The recording lens will be on. It is always on. It has been on for 11 years. The hive knows. The hive has gotten used to it. The columnists have moved on to other scandals. She asked me, on the 8th of last monad, whether I would ever go home, back to the colony, back to the plateau where the wind came down off the rocks and made the windows rattle. I told her there was nothing left of that colony. The relocation camp had been folded into a city after the war, and the city had grown over the plateau, and the windows that had rattled were under a parking structure now. I told her my mother was buried in a memorial wall in that city, with 8,000 names on it, and that I had been there once, and that once was enough. She listened, she always listened, then she said, "Then you are home." I did not say anything. I did not have to. I went back to the artisan wing and I sat at my workbench and I picked up the spindle on the corner of the table, the cheap one, the first one, the one she had been holding in her lap on the day I walked into her sanctum 11 years ago. It still sits on my bench. I keep it in working order. Sometimes, when the wing is quiet and the lights are low, I turn it on and let it play the 4-note song her mother sang to her. And I think about my mother and her mother and the wind and the windows and the strange long path that brought a human laborer with a wrench in his belt to a workbench under amber light in the heart of a swarm empire. He was supposed to die fighting. The song ends. I turn the spindle off. I put it back on the corner of the bench. Then I get back to work, because I am an engineer and there is always a fault to follow, and an engineer follows the fault. That is the human part of it. That is the part the swarm could not compute, and the part the old guard underestimated, and the part that has held the peace together for 11 years now and will, I think, hold it for longer. We are not in the end very impressive. We are small and we are short-lived and our bones are soft and our hands shake when we are afraid. We sing badly. We weep at small things. We carry the songs of our mothers into rooms where they do not belong, and we sing them to queens who ordered our mothers killed. And somehow, against every reasonable expectation, the queens listen. And when the knife comes, we step in front of it. Not because we are brave. We are not particularly brave. We step in front of it because somebody asked us, once on a quiet afternoon in a small chamber, to fix a song. And we said yes, and we meant it, and we have been meaning it in one form or another every day since. That is the whole of it. That is what the swarm did not understand about us, and what the old guard could not factor into their calculations, and what Thraxvohul, in 900 years of statecraft, never once thought to count. A human asked to fix a song will fix the song. And if the room around the song begins to burn, the human will, in most cases, fix that too. We are not loud about it. We do not announce it. We do not put it in chamber speeches or carve it into the walls of our museums, although apparently somebody has now carved a version of it in a colony I have not visited. We just do it quietly, in amber light. On our knees in front of a broken spindle, with a wrench in our belt and a soft cloth folded in our coat for cleaning lenses we will never own. While one floor up a queen we are not supposed to love sits reading reports she should have read during the day and waiting for the eighth of the monad. That is the song. That is the whole song. And it is still playing.